opportunity he means is the openness that the Donald Trump administration has shown towards Israel officially annexing more of the West Bank. And he called it a unique one-off opportunity. And to compare that to wartime, when Israel seized the West Bank from Jordan in 1967, which, by the way, most of the world considers occupied territory and considers Israeli settlements or annexations there to be illegal. That is what all of these talks about Israeli-Palestinian peace for the last 50 years have been about, by the way. To say, oh, Donald Trump is giving us this great opportunity is really striking for him to say that. What he's talking about specifically is annexing all Israeli settlements in the West Bank. And if you look at a map of where those settlements are, they're scattered everywhere, essentially. And that would allow you to essentially, he's also talking about annexing the Jordan Valley, which is this really strategic and fertile strip of land along the border with Jordan. So it would have huge implications. As you said, he's trying to ignite that settler base, that right-wing base, and expand it. But he is right now running even or slightly behind his opponent, Benny Gantz, who's styled himself as a centrist, who used to be a former chief of staff.
And Benjamin Netanyahu, almost definitely relying on something he didn't quite have before, a green light from Donald Trump, President of the United States, a green light from Jared Kushner, chief American negotiator and strategist when it comes to what used to be called the peace process in Israel. But here's chief Palestinian negotiator Saeb Erekat reacting to this announcement from the Prime Minister of Israel.
What Prime Minister Netanyahu said tonight about asking his people for a mandate to allow that will enable him to annex the Jordan Valley is paramount to a war crime. Annexation of occupied territories is a war crime.
Daniel, what's been international reaction to Benjamin Netanyahu's campaign promise?
So there has been the predictable outcry from much of the world, including the Arab world, where there has not been much of an outcry is from Washington, and that is probably, as Indira pointed out, the audience that Prime Minister Netanyahu cares most about, alongside those settlers and others, to his right that he needs for the election. I would just add to Ed and Indira's point that Netanyahu is not just worried about his political survival, he's worried about his personal freedom. He's facing 3 counts of bribery and fraud that may come up a couple weeks after the election. If he's in office, he may be able to find a way around those. If he's not in office, he's in real legal peril. So he's a political survivor, but really facing a personal threat here as well.
Now, Indira, you mentioned Benny Gantz, the challenger in this election. A lot of people have been surprised by a relatively muted response from Benny Gantz. Hasn't really made it a huge oppositional issue. He seems less concerned about it than a lot of people in the United States.
Whether or not he's actually concerned about it, I think, is beside the point. He doesn't want to alienate potential right-wing voters, settler voters, who he's hoping who will come over to him. And Dan makes an excellent point, which is that basically Netanyahu is trying to distract away the focus in this election from the corruption cases against him, and they are very serious corruption cases, and they've been piling one upon another. He wants to take all the attention away from that and put it on this West Bank issue. So why isn't it in Benny Gantz's political benefit to, not make much comment about that and keep the domestic focus on Netanyahu being corrupt?
Well, speaking of Israel, Ed, Politico magazine came out yesterday with a story alleging that Israel has been spying on the White House for the past couple of years. If the allegation's true, this wouldn't be the first time. Israel is known to spy on their friends, the Americans. The Americans are known to spy on their friends, the Israelis. The term friends has limited use when it comes to national security and spying, but Israel has denied the charge, of course. What do we know about this story, whether it actually goes on, and whether it's plausible?
Oh, I think it's entirely plausible. Israel is not a part of the Five Eyes, which are the 5 countries that share intelligence and supposedly don't spy on each other, namely United States, Britain, Australia, New Zealand and Canada, the 5 English-speaking countries. Israel has a long record of very effective spying on the United States, and there have been senior American spies who've been put in jail for being double agents. It is something that Donald Trump alternately refuses to believe would happen, but if it does happen, well, so what? It's Israel, they're friends.
All they have to do is ask.
All they have to do is ask. I mean, it is worth mentioning in the context of Donald Trump's attitude towards spies and the recent revelation that he had to withdraw, that the CIA had to withdraw a senior asset in the Russian government after Trump had released classified information to Russian senior government officials. It is worth mentioning that in the next 72 hours, as Bibi faces what might be the end of his career, or might not be, that we could expect on past performance Trump to throw him a solid, to do something that will help Bibi over the line in the next 72 hours. What that might be, I don't know, but blowing up a spy allegation would be something that wouldn't help Bibi. So Trump has downplayed that.
It is worth remembering, I think, that in the now infamous story where President Trump did reveal classified information to 2 Russian senior officials in the Oval Office, it was Israeli intelligence that he burned. It was the existence of an agent within the ranks of ISIS that the president talked about, that the Russians found out about it. Now, reporting about pulling the Russian spy, our asset, out of Moscow, subsequent reporting has suggested that the burning of that intelligence was not the reason. Other reporting says it was part of the reason. I guess we'll have to wait for books and more reporting to find out just how true that is. But I do think it's interesting that the intelligence that the president did burn, the asset that he burned when he told the Russians in the Oval Office in a boasting fashion, that was Israeli intelligence, and that was an Israeli asset that he burned. Let's talk about Afghanistan, because this week marked the 18th anniversary of 9/11. And last weekend, President Trump, we've talked about it briefly already, announced on Twitter that he was canceling secret peace talks with the Taliban at our very own Camp David in Maryland, scheduled for Sunday. He brought up the failed talks during his remarks at a 9/11 memorial ceremony on Wednesday.
The last 4 days, we have hit our enemy harder than they have ever been hit before, and that will continue. And if for any reason they come back to our country, we will go wherever they are and use power the likes of which the United States has never used before. And I'm not even talking about nuclear power. They will never have seen anything like what will happen to them.
Daniel, what's the backstory here?
So there's been an ongoing negotiation between U.S. officials and the Taliban under this administration led by Zal Khalilzad, trying to find some kind of deal that would allow a U.S. exit. The Taliban wants U.S. troops to leave. We have about 14,000 troops there now, and we want some kind of assurance from the Taliban that they will, first and foremost, not allow Afghanistan to be used for a base for terrorist attacks on the United States, but also to play nice with the Afghan government. We've been reportedly approaching some kind of deal. Trump had the idea, opposed by John Bolton and others in his administration, of bringing the Taliban and Afghan government officials to Camp David to sign off on the deal, even though it wasn't quite ready, and things fell apart. Exactly why they fell apart isn't clear, but it is clear that there is not a deal in place right now.
You're listening to 1A. I'm Todd Zwillich. Indira Lakshmanan, a Taliban spokesman, told Al Jazeera that the cancellation, quote, was astonishing for us because we had already concluded the peace agreement with the American negotiating team. The Taliban negotiators were surprised by the cancellation. They were ready for action.
Right, and the deal purportedly that would have been signed would have had the U.S. immediately beginning to reduce the 8,600 coalition troops that we have there, withdraw all of them by the end of 2020, which is soon, next year, close all 5 U.S. military bases there, release thousands of Taliban prisoners that are now in Afghan government custody, and would leave sort of the governance of the future of Afghanistan to within Afghanistan, the U.S. having nothing to do with it. One of the things I found most striking about this proposed deal, which apparently Trump was ready to sign, was that the country's name was going to return back to the name it had under Taliban rule, which is Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan.